Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we tackle big ideas so you don't have to pretend you read Foreign Affairs at brunch. Today, we're digging into Oren Cass's A Grand Strategy of Reciprocity, and it asks a really fascinating question. How on earth did America go from brilliantly containing the Soviets to, well, failing to run the world's group project? We're going to unpack that whole journey.
Yeah, so that's the big question, right? For the better part of a century, the US has tried two totally different grand strategies. One of them was this incredible massive success, and the other one, yeah, not so much. So we've got to ask, what exactly went wrong?
To really get what went wrong, we've got to put these two strategies side by side. Think of them as two completely different bets on how the world was supposed to work.
This slide just lays it out plain and simple. On one hand, you have containment. This was that patient 40-year-long game plan that built up a solid block of allies and eventually brought down the Soviet Union. It just flat out worked. And on the other hand, you have liberal hegemony. This was the big idea after the Cold War, that America could create this single US-led global order. But instead, the article argues it gave us a superpowered China, let everyone else take advantage of American generosity, and kind of rotted things out from the inside at home.
So picture this. The Cold War's over. America is the last superpower standing, on top of the world, and it decides to go to the casino and make a huge all-in bet. A bet that was based on a super optimistic and, as it turns out, a deeply flawed vision of what the future was going to look like.
In this quote, man, it just perfectly sums up the vibe of the era. This bipartisan consensus, which was really locked in by the Clinton administration, was that America could and should be the indispensable nation. There was this incredible confidence, almost hubris, this belief that the US could basically shape the entire planet in its own image. It wasn't just a policy, it was an identity.
And that whole belief system was built on these three big assumptions. They're all interlocked, so they all had to be true for the strategy to work. First, that America was so powerful it could just call the shots, anywhere, anytime. Second, that history had basically ended, and every country was on this inevitable path to becoming just like us, a free market democracy. And third, that globalization was this magic wand that would make everybody richer, especially American.
And you know, for a while there, it really looked like the bet was paying off big time. The 90s just felt like one win after another. A quick, decisive victory in the Gulf War, historic peace deals, huge free trade agreements like NAFTA and the WTO kicking off. I mean, by the end of the decade, the US government actually had a budget surplus and was totally unchallenged. It really seemed like those assumptions were golden.
But then, the music stopped. The world didn't stick to the script that Washington had written for it. Those core assumptions started to crack, and that grand strategic bet started to go very, very wrong.
So the real turning point here, it was China. In the year 2000, the US, under the Clinton administration, made a massive call. They granted China permanent normal trade relations. The thinking, which President Clinton himself laid out, was that if we just opened our markets to China, their political system would have to open up too. But China basically said thanks for the cash and took all the economic benefits while slamming the door on political change. It didn't become a democracy, it became a richer, stronger authoritarian power.
And if you want to see the result of that bet, just look at this number. It's staggering. China's shipbuilding capacity, a really key measure of industrial power, is now 1,000 times bigger than that of the United States. No, that's not a typo. 1,000 times.
And it's not just heavy industry. This chart brilliantly shows how innovation just followed the factories right out the door. Back in the mid-2000s, the US was the undisputed leader in pretty much every critical technology you could think of. Now fast forward to today, and the roles have almost completely flipped. China is now leading in 57 out of 64 of these key technologies. The whole bet that America could offshore the dirty work, but keep the smart, high-value stuff at home? Total failure.
So what was the price of this failed bet? Well, it was steep. Abroad, it meant getting bogged down in forever wars that cost trillions of dollars and thousands of lives for very little gain. Our allies in Europe and Asia kind of got lazy, becoming free riders who knew the US would pick up the defense bill. And back home, whole sections of American industry were just hollowed out. Communities were shattered, and we woke up one day to realize we couldn't even make critical things like medicine without relying on our biggest rival.
This quote from the article just hits different, right? It's that classic story, shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. The generation that won the Cold War built up this incredible national treasure of power and wealth. The next generation spent it like there was no tomorrow. And the article argues the last 30 years has basically been the story of that inheritance being completely squandered. Okay, so that's the diagnosis. It's a pretty grim picture. The old strategy failed. Spectacularly.
So what's the alternative? Well, the article proposes a new wager, a totally different grand strategy. It's called reciprocity.
So what is reciprocity? Let's break it down. Basically, think of it as a new club for market democracies, but this club has strict rules. If you want to be in, you have to pull your own weight and contribute on similar terms as everyone else. And this is the key part. The club works together to keep out countries that refuse to play by those same rules. The era of the free ride is over.
Now here's where it gets really interesting, and a little counterintuitive. The article argues that America, being relatively weaker now, actually gives it more power. How? Because for the first time in forever, the US can actually, credibly, threaten to walk away from the whole system it built. It doesn't have the juice to run everything anymore, so the threat of just pulling back and looking out for number one is very real. And that, right there, is immense leverage to renegotiate all the bad deals. So if the US is going to come back to the table and renegotiate, what are the demands? What are the new rules of the game for sitting at the table with America? Well, this new strategy is built on a few really clear, non-negotiable principles.
Here they are, the 3 core demands. Number 1, allies have to step up and take care of security in their own backyards. The US will be a partner, not a babysitter. Number 2, trade has to be balanced. No more countries running up massive, permanent trade surpluses with the US. You've got to buy as much as you sell. And number 3, the big one, China is out. You have to pick a side. You can play in the American-led economic sphere, or you can play in China's. You can't do both.
This table does a great job of showing what that first demand looks like in the real world. The article contrasts Germany, which it calls a security client, basically relying on US troops and money, with Israel, a partner that invests heavily in its own defense and is a security asset for its region. This new strategy demands more Israels and fewer Germanys.
The second demand goes right after these beggar-thy-neighbor policies. For decades, countries like Germany, Japan, and South Korea built their entire economies on exporting way more than they import, and they just expected the American consumer to buy all their stuff. This gutted American industry. Reciprocity says that party is over. If you want to be in the club, you commit to buying roughly as much as you sell.
And finally, we get to the starkest choice of all. The logic here is pretty simple. You just can't have a functioning free market system when one of the biggest players, China, is rigging the game. Its state-owned companies and market manipulation just break everything. So to keep the new club fair, countries have to choose: decouple from China's economy.
So when you put it all together, what you have is a much humbler, more realistic strategy. The article describes the last 30 years as America being on tilt, like a poker player chasing bad losses with even riskier bets. This new strategy is about stepping away from that table, taking a breath, and making a sober, realistic assessment. It's about placing a bet that the United States can actually win. As always, our producer, FireflyHaku, is here to make sure our grand strategy doesn't collapse faster than a peace summit on Twitter. Thanks for hanging out, share the podcast love, and come back for round 2.